In this JavaScript tutorial, I'm going to show how to code lists using JavaScript, which is going to be very important. I wanted my next video topic to be making tic-tac-toe, but I realized there was just one concept that we really need to know before we can make tic-tac-toe. So I've decided I'm also just uploading a time-lapse video or just a video of me coding tic-tac-toe in under an hour, which is not really a part of the series, but I'm doing that for fun. But before we actually do the tic-tac-toe tutorial, we need to learn about lists. Now, if you've ever coded before, another word for this is array, so they're the same thing. Here I have all the code from the last tutorial that I did, and I don't really want to delete it, and you should probably save it just because it's a really good documentation on how to draw using Canvas, and really this is like most of what I use. All of it's right here. In fact, I almost never use the lines. Circles I don't use very much. It's mainly just squares and images that I use. But I would say keep this, write it down somewhere. I'm going to enter a few more lines after this and show you lists here. So I'm going to leave this screen the same. So a list in JavaScript, again, is the same. It goes by a few names. Some other programming languages call it an array. Like in C++, C Sharp, this is going to be called an array, but it's the same basic thing. It's just a variable that can hold multiple values instead of one. So all our variables up to this point have only been able to hold one value, no matter what kind of value that be. It could only hold one. Well, a list can hold multiple values. And here's how you create a list. I'm going to start with var and then my list, just like a normal variable. You start with var, then you give it a name. I'm going to set it equal to, and I'm going to type 2 brackets. This tells our browser that we're working with a list. And inside of here, I can put multiple values all together. So this is a list of 4 different values. And it's pretty useful to use. I can console.log my list, and it's going to print out the entire list here. So notice it has the word array in the log, and really if I'm using that word wrong, they're pretty much interchangeable, at least for our purposes. And here shows the list or array, and it tells me all the things in it. 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are the only values that are in it. Now notice these numbers next to it, 0, 1, 2, and 3. Those are the indices, the positions in the list. And this brings me to a very important concept about lists. Lists start at position 0. So this 1 is actually position 0. It is not the first element in the list, it is the 0th. This 2 is the first, 3 is the second, 4 is the third. And I know that can be kind of confusing. Once you do this long enough, you really get used to it. I don't think about this anymore, but just remember that lists start at 0. So it gives us, in the log, it gives us the position. 0th position is 1. The first position is 2. Second position is 3. Third position is 4. Those are the indexes, the indices, and these are the actual data values in the blue for me. And so that's pretty important. I'm going to talk about a lot more about that later. Something to note about lists is they don't have to all be of one type. I know other programming languages require that, like C, C++, Java. When you make an array in any of those languages, they have to all be the same type. But here I can add other stuff. I can add true. I can add a word. And I can just mix it up like that. And notice this time, so true is the 4th element. Word is the 5th, or at least position 5. And notice now we have our list of 6 items stopping at index 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, true, word. Now, this by itself would not be very useful. What makes lists useful is that they can hold all this data and you can access the data individually. So I can, instead of logging the whole list, I can just log just as true. How would I do that? Well, this number, this index, is going to be key. True is index 4 in my list, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I type my list bracket 4. Save that, rerun it. I only get true in the console. That's how you get one specific value from inside the list. Or if I wanted the 3, well, that's position, that's the third element in the list. That is our index 2. So index 2, our third item, but index 2. So I'm going to do my list 2. And that's going to give us the number 3 in the console. And so that's how you get individual values of a list. I could say something like if my list 4 equals true, then console.log yay, something like that. Because you can use these in normal code logic. You're not just going to log these values to the console. And here, sure enough, you get yay to the console. So that's really what lists are for. You're going to use it in your code in real applications like this instead of just printing out items. Now, let me show how to get the full size of the list. I can say console.log my list has plus my list.length plus items. So my list.length will tell me how many items total are in the list. Now don't mistake that with the last index. This list has 6 items in it. 1, 2, 3, 4, true word. But the last possible index is 5. But this is going to give me a 6. My list has 6 items, and that's all correct. Now I want to show you how to use a for loop to print all the items in a list. So we already saw to get an individual item or element, that's just what I'm going to call it. That's the real term for it. Each variable that's inside of a list is called an element. So each element of the list can be accessed by saying my list brackets and then its index. So like 0. That would have printed 1 if I console.log my list 0. But how do I do all of them? The key for this is going to be using a for loop. I can say for let I be 0, I is less than my list dot length I plus plus. And before I even explain this any further, let's just print I and see what this does. It prints 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Because I started I as 0, and right now the list.length is 6. So I basically just said I is 0, go as long as I is less than 6. So that obviously gives me 0 to 5. Of course, I didn't type in the number 6, I typed in my list.length, which is the better thing to do. Notice though that 0 to 5 are all the correct indices for our list here. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't have a number that's too small or too big. It's just every number in this list. So I is going to be our correct index every time. So what I can do is console.log, instead of I can log my list I. And this will work because I is going to be 0, which is the first item in the list, and I is going to go all the way to 5, which is the last item in the list. And if I save this code, I get every item in the list. And that's way better than trying to do it individually with console.log my list 0 and then doing that again. Then changing all the numbers, 1, 2, that's terrible. But a for loop makes going through lists or iterating through lists pretty easy to do. I is all the correct values when you start it at 0 and you say I is less than my list.length. Now notice if we did I is less than or equal to my list.length, I'm basically saying keep going as long as I is less than or equal to 6. That would have given me the numbers 0 to 6. 6, even though that's the length of the list, that is not a correct index in the list. There is no 6th item. So what is our code going to respond with? 1, 2, 3, 4, true word, undefined. I tried to access an item in the list that did not exist. So, man, I didn't like that rhyme, so pretend that didn't happen. But I'm going to delete that equal sign, and we're not going to go out of bounds. Now, sometimes going out of bounds can be helpful, because I can, if I want to add a new item to the list, and let me refresh that. Okay, it's gone. So I can add a new item to the list by going out of bounds. I can say my list 6 is equal to hello. So console.log my list 6 does not work, but I can set my list 6 to hello and then run the for loop again. And notice what happens this time. I get the first set in the for loop, but then the second time, oops, my list 6 okay, I forgot to replace this with my list.length because that's what we need to keep it as, my list.length. So notice what happens here. The first time we get our normal values, but then we get an addition, hello. So to add an item to the list, you just have to go out of bounds by 1 and then add it here. I believe you should be able to go out of bounds more. Like I could just do 8. I could skip. So I could skip position 6. I could skip position 7 and then go to 8 and then set 8 to hello. But the problem with that is what happens then, and let's just delete the first one. What happens then is even though 8 is now set to hello, 6 and 7 get skipped over. So when I go through the list, I get 1, 2, 3, 4 true word, 6 is undefined, 7 is undefined, but 8 is hello. I typically don't recommend going any more than just 1 out of bounds, because that makes more sense. Why would I leave gaps like this in between our real data and undefined data? So that's how you add an item to the list. But notice there's an even easier way of doing this. 6 happens to be the length of the list. And now it is not a correct index, it's out of bounds, but it is the length of the list. So to get 1 out of bounds, I can just type my list.length, and that will add automatically to the very end of the list, just because the list length is always 1 past the maximum index here. 5 is the maximum index because we count at 0 and then go to 5. But 6 is the size. 6 is 1 out of bounds. This would do the same thing. But notice I can copy and paste this, and this works. I've now just added 4 extra hellos to the list without even having to change what's in the brackets. That's because my list.length was 6 here. Then we add another one. Now it's 7. So I'm using 7 here. Then I'm using 8 here and 9 here. So whenever you want to add an item to the list, even though you can just do it anywhere out of bounds, the best way of adding an item to the list is by doing it to the end. My list.length, putting that in brackets. That will always give you exactly 1 out of bounds. And with that, I want to show you one more thing. You can always modify the data in the list. I actually meant to show that way before I showed any of this. You can modify the data in the list by saying my list, and then I'm going to do my list.length -1. That just is the last one, but that's not adding a new one. That's just actually giving me the last one in the list. My list.length -1 is equal to 99. So what's going to happen here is we're going to start with this list. We're going to add 4 hellos to it, but then this last one we're going to change to a 99. Oh, except I never actually printed the list again, so let's do that at the end. And we get 1, 2, 3, 4 true word, 3 hellos, and a 99 because we added 4 hellos, then we replace the last one with a 99. But you can replace any value. I can replace the very first item in the list with nonsense. And I'm going to get nonsense at the beginning. Let me show you one final thing. I know I lied. I said that like 2 minutes ago. Let me show you one final thing with lists. I said earlier at the beginning that you can actually mix the items together. This was new for me learning to program, because for me, you could have a array of integers, an array of booleans, an array of words, but you can never mix them. Well, JavaScript lets you mix them to the point that you can even put a list inside of another list. So I can add a list of letters, A, B, C, D. So now notice the sixth item of my list is another list. And this is called a two-dimensional list. It's two-dimensional because you can think of this as, like one axis, like the y-axis, and this as the x-axis. But more specifically, it's just, well, actually, let me just show the next example. So I'm going to go ahead and delete these. We don't need this anymore. And we don't need this. So now if I run it, it's going to print all the items followed by that extra list that we put inside the list. This is a multi-dimensional list here. Now I can actually run a for loop that's only going to print these letters. But first, let me show you how to print A. How would I just print A? Like, how do I get an item from the list? Because console.log mylist6 is not going to give me the A. It's actually going to give me all of it right here. I don't want that. Well, let's get rid of that for loop. So console.log brackets 6 gives me the whole list. But how do I just get A? Well, here's where the multi-dimensional part comes in. I can add another set of brackets and then put 0. Notice what this does. One, this will give me the A. But let's see why. What is mylist6? Mylist6 is this here, this whole thing. So now, index this. What is this bracket 0? That is A, because A is the first item. I'm just going to put a space. A is the first, the 0th item. B is first, C is second, D is third. So mylist6 will give me this whole list, but add another bracket. Now I'm specifying element 0 inside of this list here. This is a multi-dimensional array or multi-dimensional list, and this will give me the A. I can get the C by saying, okay, well, mylist6, that gives me the list. C is 0, 1, index 2. So I'm going to put a 2 in here. Rerun, and I get C. So I can run a for loop that will just run through that list inside. For let I be 0, I is less than my list 6 dot length. So just like what we had earlier, except I want the length not of the whole list, but of the list inside the list. My list 6 dot length, I plus plus. What are we going to log? We're going to log my list, and then 6, and then I. I is going to give me 0 to 3, because the length of this list is 4. So I less than 4, well, that's going to give me 0 to 3. And that's going to give me all the letters inside of that second list. Let's get rid of that first one so it's clear. And we get A, B, C, and D. That is a multi-dimensional list. I know what I said about X and Y axis, how those might have been confusing, but typically we think of this as the Y position and this as the X position, because if I were to space the list like this, then that might make a little bit more sense. So here is the exact same list, I'm just spacing it differently. So the Y is basically up and down. So this is a Y of 0, because, 1 was the 0th item. This is a Y of 1. This is a Y of 2. This is a Y of 3. This is a Y of 4. This is a Y of 5. This is the Y level 6. It's basically, I'm just taking that exactly from the same indices here. So my Y is 6. What is my X? 0, 1, 2, 3. Those are my possible X positions for my Y of 6. And I'll go ahead and stop there, because in the next video, we're going to see more of multi-dimensional lists, and that X, that Y is going to make more sense there. And so thank you for watching my list tutorial, and we're going to get to apply it in the next video where we make tic-tac-toe.